Oh, my dears. The hardest blows always come from where you least expect them, from those you trust the most. I learned painfully how that beguiling cloak called wealth, once draped over someone, can tear away their conscience and even their memories. This is my story, how my sister Margaret, after inheriting that vast fortune, turned her back on me, her elder sister, and cut me off from our family home and the memory of our mother. When my sister Margaret and I first came into the world, we didn't sleep in feather beds or have a spread of food laid out for us. We grew up in the one little room our father left us, sometimes sharing a dry crust, but always clutching each other's hands. I was always the kind who accepted her lot, rooted to the land, satisfied with little, trying to keep our home together as our late mother had taught me. But Margaret's gaze was fixed on the glittering shop windows of the big cities where our dusty lanes ended. Her restless hunger for wealth, as it turned out, began the day she met that wealthy gentleman from London who'd come to our town on business. The ill-omened morning she packed her case to marry him and move to London, when she turned to me and said, "Sis, when I'm rich, I'll get you out of this life." I saw the hard ambition in her eyes, yet I still couldn't fault my sister. In the first months after Margaret left for the city to live with her well-off husband, I read the glossy letters she sent, letters that spoke only of how happy she was. And I felt I was reading not my sister, but the script of the lavish persona she'd adopted. Time flowed like a merciless stream. Weekly postcards dwindled to monthly notes, then to an annual Christmas card. And in the end, even her voice on the telephone took on a remote, imperious tone, as if the person speaking was not the sister who had shared the same bed and patched clothes for years, but some housekeeper she'd only just met. When our father took to his bed and his tired body could not go on, and I begged Margaret on the phone, "Father's dying, go and see him, ask his blessing." She told me, without a flicker of sympathy, "I've an extremely important engagement." "I can't come, but my solicitor will handle any expenses." That call, so cold and callous, I shall never forget. After the 40-day memorial, when I rang to talk about what to do with our little family home, the only thing left to us, the house where our childhood laughter still echoed, her condescending tones seared into me as the cruelest proof of what money does to a person. Of that dilapidated place, as she dismissed it, she said over the phone, "Sis, are you seriously making a fuss about that patch of land? Don't waste my time with this. Have my solicitor ring you and sort whatever needs sorting." In that moment, the sister I had known as Margaret died for me on the other end of the line. For days after Margaret's poisonous words, storms raged inside me. Still, a stubborn spark of hope kept me glued to that old telephone, thinking perhaps she'd listen to her conscience and ring me. But when it finally rang, the voice that met my ear was neither my sister's nor anyone I knew. It was that clipped, emotionless tone of a well-paid solicitor. He said he was calling on behalf of his client, Mrs. Margaret Ellis, my own sister, to deliver her legal instructions. In that glacial voice, he read them out as if it were a court order, that the only thing my father had left us, the little cottage I still lived in, was to be sold immediately, and the proceeds divided equally between us. No delay, no discussion. Then he added, in the same polished tone, that Mrs. Ellis wished, as a gesture of kindness, to offer me a small allowance to cover my costs until the sale went through. For a moment, I couldn't speak. That offer wasn't a sister's share. It was the kind of coin you toss to a beggar at the corner. That's when I understood. Margaret hadn't only sold our father's house. She had traded away every memory, every laugh, every bond that once tied us together. She wanted to erase her past entirely, to erase me. When that pompous solicitor hung up, the silence that followed was so heavy it felt alive. It mingled with the faint scent of my late mother that still clung to the walls, and the cruelty of what my sister had done stabbed through me like a rusted blade. The few pounds she offered as a favor were an insult to the years I'd spent keeping this house standing, to the care I'd given our father in his final breath, and to my own pride as a sister. She thought her money could buy it all, yet to me that money was no better than the mud on the street. While she floated through life in her grand London mansion, I knew she had no need for the meager sum this house might fetch. No, what she wanted wasn't money. It was to bury the past she so despised. This house, our childhood, and me. And in that moment, the gentle, long-suffering Mary, who had always said, "She's my sister, let it go," disappeared. In her place stood a woman who would never again let her father's memory, her mother's scent, or her own dignity be traded for greed. I steadied my trembling hand and dialed the number on the solicitor's glossy card. My heart thudded like a drum, but I kept my voice firm. "Tell your client I want none of her charity. This cottage is my home too, and I won't give it up, not for any price, not while I still draw breath." When that pompous solicitor's voice filled my ear again, flat, mechanical, too self-important even to use my name, just a curt, "Yes, go on," my breath caught in my throat. But then I pictured my late father as clear as day saying, "Stand tall, my girl." I drew a deep breath and found my courage. Keeping my voice steady, I said, "Listen here, Mr. Lawson. You tell your client, that fine lady, my own sister, that we both know she doesn't need the few pounds she'll get from this crumbling cottage. But I have no need for her charity from those gilded palaces she lives in. This house," I went on, "these walls have seen my childhood, my mother's toil, and my father's final breath. So you tell that millionaire sister of mine I'll only leave this place in a coffin,
I won't bow to her threats, nor let this family home be sacrificed to her greed." There was a pause, a sharp, frosty silence. Then that icy voice returned, brittle with suppressed anger. "Mrs. Harper, if you refuse this reasonable proposal and continue to obstruct the sale, my client will be forced to pursue legal action for dissolution of co-ownership. The property would then be sold at auction, very likely for a significantly lower price. I must formally advise you of that outcome." That word auction cracked like a whip in my mind. I suddenly understood that my sister would not hesitate to use not only her wealth, but the cold blade of the law itself to drive me from my home. The battle had officially begun. As I placed the receiver gently back onto its cradle, the word auction still whispered through the room like a curse. The walls that had always sheltered me felt colder, heavier, as though they were leaning in. I had no refuge left in this world but my father's memory and my own pride. The thought of facing her high-priced London solicitors alone and penniless in those gray, heartless corridors of justice weighed on me like a stone made of despair. I thought of the night she would rest her head on my knee, right here in this very chair, sobbing, "Sister, what would I do without you?" And now she saw me as nothing but a stranger, willing to throw her own blood into the street for a scrap of property. I could hardly believe that woman was once my little sister, Margaret. Then it hit me. This was no simple dispute over an inheritance. This was a war, not between sisters, but between decency and greed. Between a heart still human and one long since sold to pride. I didn't have a single pound to pay a barrister, but I swore I wouldn't bow to injustice. I didn't sleep a wink that night. At first light, I knew exactly what I had to do. Knock on the door of Mr. Graham, the old retired solicitor in our village, the only man left with enough conscience to stand beside me.
By the morning after that blackest of nights, the sun seemed to rise not to warm me, but to throw my helplessness into cruel relief. As I walked through the narrow cobbled streets of our little English town, streets I'd known all my life, my head hung so low it was as if I were walking to the gallows. I made my way, slow and heavy, to Mr. Graham's cramped office on the second floor of the old coaching inn, an office my father used to visit in his working days. When I pushed open the door, it gave its familiar groan, and the air inside smelled of dust, paper, and old books. It was nothing like the glossy mahogany offices I imagined that London solicitor worked in. Cold, glassy, lifeless. This room was different. The walls yellowed by time and prayer, the shelves bowed under the weight of law books, the kind of place where decency still had a pulse. And there, behind the old oak desk, sat Mr. Graham, my father's old friend, a man whose honesty was written on the lines on his face. When he saw me, pale, hollow-eyed, broken from a night without sleep, he set down his fountain pen, peered over his glasses, and said with that gentle northern lilt of his, "Good heavens, Anne, what's brought you here at this hour? Sit down, love, catch your breath. What storm's blown you into my dusty little office?" That voice, steady, fatherly, kind,
undid me. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat and haltingly told him everything. The cruelty my wealthy sister had dealt me, how my own flesh and blood meant to throw me into the street. Saying it aloud to another human being, and to one who had known my father, felt like tearing open a wound. Mr. Graham listened without a word, the patience of a father in every nod. When I'd finished, he drew a long, heavy breath. Anne, he said softly, what you've suffered shouldn't happen to anyone. There's no justice nor mercy in it. Then came the truth that cut deeper than any blade. But the law, love, the law isn't written in compassion. It's written in ink. I'm sorry to say your sister does have the legal right to force a sale. That's what they call a partition claim. She can do it, and the court would have to oblige. His words hit me like the ceiling falling in. For a moment I couldn't breathe. To hear it said aloud that the law itself stood with her, not me, crushed whatever hope I had left. I thanked him, voice barely more than a whisper, and left the office. The old wooden stairs creaked beneath my feet. Outside, the marketplace clattered and hummed, but to me, it sounded miles away, as though I were walking through fog. My mind was already at home, wondering how I'd find the strength to open that door again. When I reached it, the brass key in my hand felt alien, like it no longer belonged. I knew now that everything behind that door, every memory in those walls, wasn't mine anymore. It was property, a thing my sister could send the bailiffs for. I closed the door and leaned against the timber, its chills seeping into my back. Then the tears came, all the ones I'd swallowed for pride. They ran hot down my cheeks, born from the wound that betrayal leaves. I was alone, utterly, terribly alone. I sat on the cold flagstone floor, staring at the door, waiting for the sound I dreaded most, the soft scrape of an envelope sliding under it, the notice that would tell me I no longer belonged in my own home. I climbed the creaking stairs of that old downtown building, not with the helpless shame I'd felt the first time I came, but with the cold, undeserved anger that comes from holding an official act of betrayal in your own hand, proof of a heartlessness delivered by your own blood. I knew I had no time left to beg for mercy. It was time to get ready for a fight. Instead of knocking softly on the elderly attorney's door, I squared my shoulders and pushed it open. When Mr. Hayes saw me, eyes puffy from crying, but my gaze sharp as a blade, the fatherly kindness on his face shifted into the weary understanding of a man who knows how the law really works. Without a word, I set down in the middle of his old desk the cold papers my millionaire sister's lawyers had prepared, the ones meant to throw me out of my own home, plaintiff and defendant stamped across the top as if I were laying a heavy weight in the room. I locked eyes with him. Last time you told me the law was on her side, Mr. Hayes, I said, steadying the tremor in my voice. But I didn't come to hear what the law says today. I came to hear what a conscience would say. I want to know if there's a single line in those dusty books of yours that can defend my honor against this cruelty, this ingratitude. Seeing the break in me that still refused to bend, Mr. Hayes drew a long breath, laid his hand on the papers and said, "All right, Ashley. If they're coming with the power of money, then we'll stand with the power of memory and what's right. We'll file our answer within the deadline, and in that courtroom, we'll say to her face that this house is not just a piece of paper called a deed." When I stepped out of that dusty office, his "we'll fight" rang in my ears like a bell of hope. Yet I knew how faint that hope really was. Against their mountain of money and that army of merciless attorneys, our little search for justice would look so small. Before the ink from the county courthouse had even dried, the bad news had already spread like a plague through the close-knit streets of our small town. The guy at the corner store I greeted every day, the baker who saved me a loaf, even neighbors of 40 years were looking at me with pity. Poor Ashley, or with those judging whispers, "She's even in court with her own sister." The mud Faye hurled at me from her millionaire life stained more than my house. It splashed my name in that town, soiling the clean reputation I'd knit together, stitch by stitch, for years. I was no longer the neighborhood's big sister, but that pitied woman dragged to court by her own flesh and blood, the subject of gossip. On those sleepless nights, I knew I wasn't the only one awake. That elderly, decent attorney, Mr. Hayes, was awake among his dusty shelves and thick statute books, searching for a way to tell a cold judge about my memories, about the last things I did for my father, about what that house truly meant to me. And then the second letter came. Not another threat, but a date. The day when in a cold courtroom my millionaire sister and I would face each other as plaintiff and defendant. When I read that date, I knew we had stepped onto a road with no way back. The morning of the hearing came, gray, heavy, and airless. Even the sun hid behind the clouds, as if it too wanted no part in what was about to happen. I pulled my old wool shawl tight around me and walked, step by step, toward the small town courthouse. Each footfall felt like the toll of a funeral bell, my own. Beside me was Mr. Graham, my aging but upright solicitor. When we stepped into the crowded corridor, all clicking heels, rustling papers, and voices bouncing off the stone walls, I felt utterly out of place, a ghost among officials. It didn't feel like I was defending my father's home. It felt like I was on trial for daring to hold on to it. And then I saw her. At the far end of the hall stood a figure I hadn't seen since our father's funeral. Margaret Ellis, my sister, surrounded by her polished London lawyers, draped in fur. She looked as though she'd come to a gala at the Savoy, not a county court. For one fleeting moment our eyes met. In hers I found no remorse, no flicker of the girl who once clung to me in the dark. Only cold, imperious disdain, the look one reserves for someone beneath notice. The clerk pushed open the heavy oak doors and called our names. Mr. Graham touched my arm gently. "Stay strong, Anne," his hand seemed to say. Under Margaret's final withering glance, I crossed the threshold into that silent, echoing room where my fate waited to be signed and sealed. The courtroom was vast and cold, the ceiling so high it swallowed sound. The judge, half hidden behind his bench, seemed a figure carved from stone. I, by contrast, felt as small and misplaced as an old chair dragged into a room of strangers. "The claimant's counsel may proceed," the judge intoned. Margaret's lead solicitor rose, every crease in his suit sharp enough to cut, and began reciting the case in fluent, lifeless legal jargon. He spoke of joint property, partition rights, and how his client's sister was emotionally obstructing a lawful sale of a derelict estate. Each phrase landed like a blow. Property, asset, market value. Words that stripped the house of everything it truly was. My childhood, my mother's laughter in the kitchen, my father's final breath. To them it was numbers on a ledger. To me it was the last piece of my soul still standing. And when he finished, he threw me a glance of professional pity, or perhaps disgust, and said coldly that sentiment had no place in law, that the house should be sold immediately, even by enforcement, if required. And then, as that chill silence spread through the room, Mr. Graham rose. The floorboards groaned under his old weight. He adjusted his spectacles, looked up at the bench, and said, in a voice that carried both dignity and quiet defiance, "Your Honor, if I may, before we speak of assets and shares, allow us to speak of a home. This case, sir, is not about property. It is about gratitude, memory, and the debt one owes to family." When Mr. Graham's voice, weathered by years of fighting for fairness, rose through that cold courtroom, it sounded utterly unlike the sleek London lawyer's clipped recitation of statutes. His was not the voice of someone who knew the law, but of someone who had lived what the law forgot. In a tone both trembling and steady, he told the court how I had cared for my bedridden father until his final breath alone, while my sister, Mrs. Margaret Ellis, hadn't once picked up the phone to ask how he was. He spoke of the years I had given, the youth I had lost, the life I had built around that small cottage, backing every word with quiet evidence and weary truth. And yet, as he spoke, Margaret sat unmoved. Her eyes were glass, her expression a mask. She toyed with the clasp of her designer handbag, bored as though this were a tedious play she'd seen before. Watching her, I felt the last scrap of sympathy leave me for good. Then Mr. Graham straightened, his voice deepening. "Your Honor," he said, "the law concerns itself with ink and signatures, but justice must also consider the sweat mixed into the mortar, the care that fills the air of a home, and the debt owed to a lifetime of service. To force this sale would be an abuse of right and an affront to conscience." That phrase, abuse of right, rang through the high-ceilinged chamber like a bell. Even the row of London barristers exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, someone had spoken a language that wasn't written on parchment, but carved in truth, and something shifted. The judge, who until then had sat hidden behind his mountain of papers, looked up. His eyes softened just slightly, and I could feel that even he saw now not a claimant and a defendant, but a daughter who had forgotten gratitude and a sister who had given everything. The spell broke. Margaret's lead counsel sprang from his seat, his composure cracking. "Your Honor," he barked, "this is a court of law, not a stage for sentiment. We are here to discuss property rights, not personal guilt." Then came his final cruelty, flung like poison. "The defendant," he said, "has occupied my client's property for years without paying a penny of rent under the guise of care. It is my client, in fact, who has been deprived of rightful income." That word, rent, hit me harder than any blow. It wasn't a statement. It was filth hurled across the years. In that one word, my sister had priced every sleepless night, every whispered prayer beside our dying father. She had turned love into an invoice. I might have fallen apart if not for the judge's sharp voice cutting through the air. "Order in the court." The gavel slammed. Silence followed. Then, after a long pause, the judge spoke, not coldly, but with measured gravity. "The court finds reason to examine the defendant's claim of contribution. A survey of the property and an inquiry into her care and service shall be conducted by independent assessors. The hearing is adjourned." The words echoed like distant thunder. Not victory, but something close to hope. For the first time, the walls of that courtroom seemed less cold.
When Mr. Graham's voice, weathered by years of fighting for fairness, rose through that cold courtroom, it sounded utterly unlike the sleek London lawyer's clipped recitation of statutes. His was not the voice of someone who knew the law, but of someone who had lived what the law forgot. In a tone both trembling and steady, he told the court how I had cared for my bedridden father until his final breath alone, while my sister, Mrs. Margaret Ellis, hadn't once picked up the phone to ask how he was. He spoke of the years I had given, the youth I had lost, the life I had built around that small cottage, backing every word with quiet evidence and weary truth. And yet, as he spoke, Margaret sat unmoved. Her eyes were glass, her expression a mask. She toyed with the clasp of her designer handbag, bored, as though this were a tedious play she'd seen before. Watching her, I felt the last scrap of sympathy leave me for good. Then Mr. Graham straightened, his voice deepening. "Your Honor," he said, "the law concerns itself with ink and signatures, but justice must also consider the sweat mixed into the mortar, the care that fills the air of a home, and the debt owed to a lifetime of service. To force this sale would be an abuse of right and an affront to conscience." That phrase, abuse of right, rang through the high-ceilinged chamber like a bell. Even the row of London barristers exchanged uneasy glances.
For the first time, someone had spoken a language that wasn't written on parchment, but carved in truth. And something shifted. The judge, who until then had sat hidden behind his mountain of papers, looked up. His eyes softened just slightly, and I could feel that even he saw now not a claimant and a defendant, but a daughter who had forgotten gratitude and a sister who had given everything. The spell broke. Margaret's lead counsel sprang from his seat, his composure cracking. "Your Honor," he barked, "this is a court of law, not a stage for sentiment. We are here to discuss property rights, not personal guilt." Then came his final cruelty, flung like poison. "The defendant," he said, "has occupied my client's property for years without paying a penny of rent, under the guise of care. It is my client, in fact, who has been deprived of rightful income." That word rent hit me harder than any blow. It wasn't a statement, it was filth hurled across the years. In that one word, my sister had priced every sleepless night, every whispered prayer beside our dying father. She had turned love into an invoice. I might have fallen apart if not for the sharp voice of the judge cutting through the air. "Order in the court!" The gavel slammed. Silence followed. Then, after a long pause, the judge spoke, not coldly but with measured gravity. "The court finds reason to examine the defendant's claim of contribution. A survey of the property and an inquiry into her care and service shall be conducted by independent assessors. The hearing is adjourned." The words echoed like distant thunder. Not victory, but something close to hope. For the first time, the walls of that courtroom seemed less cold. When the gavel came down and the judge adjourned the case, I walked out of that cold courtroom not like a criminal, but like someone granted a final breath before the sentence. For once, the court had admitted that my work in that so-called derelict cottage, the rent they mocked me for, might, after all, carry worth. Out in the corridor, I saw Margaret's perfect poise crack. Her face flushed purple with fury. She had expected her wealth to sweep everything aside in a day, that I would crumble beneath her London barristers. But Mr. Graham's single word, conscience, had lodged itself like grit in the cogs of her flawless plan. As we made our way down the courthouse steps, he explained gently what the judge's order meant. "A survey team," he said, "strangers, government men with clipboards, would come to my home to measure the value of my care. They would calculate, as if it were a transaction, what my years of service were worth in pounds and pence." That night, back at the cottage, the walls that once felt like sanctuaries seemed to draw away from me. Every creak of the floorboards whispered of inspection. Every corner felt like a secret soon to be exposed. My home was no longer mine. It was evidence. Waiting for those men was its own kind of torture. And then, one bleak morning, the knock came. When I opened the door, 3 officials stood there, in dark suits, notebooks under their arms, measuring sticks in hand. For a moment I thought they'd come to repossess my life.
They stepped inside without hesitation, their damp shoes dulling the shine of the floor my mother had polished 1,000 times. Each clang of their metal rulers against the walls sounded like a hammer against my chest. I tried to speak. "Gentlemen, I patched that ceiling myself so my father wouldn't breathe the mold. And that tap? I changed it one night while he was feverish." But they didn't hear. They looked at plasterwork, not people. They wrote down measurements, brands, figures, numbers that meant nothing and cost everything. And then, like a shadow slipping in, came Margaret's solicitor. Each time I spoke, he interrupted smoothly. "These are standard household repairs. Labor without receipts carries no compensable value." When they finally left, the door clicked shut, and silence filled the air. They had taken no furniture, no heirlooms, only something far worse. They had priced my memories. The invisible tags they left behind hung heavy on every wall, on every breath still carrying my father's name. I stood there, alone in that hollow house, feeling smaller than ever, a woman whose love had been weighed, measured, and found worthless. That night, in the frost and silence, I scrubbed the mud from the floorboards of my father's cottage, the prints left by those officials who had come to measure my life. I knew I wasn't cleaning dirt. I was wiping away the insult of their cold indifference. To them, what I had given wasn't sacrifice. It was maintenance cost. Days passed in heavy quiet until the telephone rang. Mr. Graham's voice came through, hoarse with anger and exhaustion. "Anne, my dear, they've filed the report. Come, if you've the strength, and see what value they've put on your life." When I reached his little office, he laid the papers before me with shaking hands. There, in neat black ink, my years of care, the sleepless nights, the endless days of tending my dying father had been reduced to a repair allowance, a few pitiful pounds. And then came the second blow, an attached petition from Margaret's barrister, calling even that small sum excessive and demanding arrears of rent for the years I had occupied the property without payment. My own sister had turned my devotion into debt. She had rebranded love as liability, service as trespass.
By the morning of the final hearing, I no longer felt anger, only the numb surrender of someone awaiting an execution they can't stop. The courthouse smelled of cold paper and dust, and my heart beat not from fear, but from exhaustion. When the judge entered, Margaret's lawyer rose, brimming with triumph. He held up the report like a banner of conquest and declared, "My client seeks immediate sale of the property and recovery of back rent with interest for the defendant's prolonged unlawful occupancy." He sat down, smirking toward Margaret, who returned a satisfied nod. Then, slowly, Mr. Graham stood. From his worn leather case, he drew a yellowed envelope sealed with a faded crest. His voice shook, not with fear, but with weight. "Your Honor," he said, "I have been silent until now, waiting for this moment. But since the claimant has seen fit to price a lifetime of care in pounds and pence, the time has come to reveal the truth, the final will of their late father." The room stilled. You could hear the clock tick. He unfolded the paper, its edges brittle with age, and raised his voice. "This is a notarized deed signed years ago by the late Mr. Harper, transferring full ownership of the family home to his elder daughter, Anne Harper, in gratitude for her lifelong care." And below that, in my father's handwriting, "The younger has chosen gold over kin. Let this home remain with the one who stayed." The judge struck the gavel once, hard. Margaret's lawyers paled. Their smug smiles vanished. Their empire of paper collapsed with one sound. As they hurried from the courtroom, heads bowed under the weight of shame, I felt something inside me lift. Not pride, but peace. And that day I learned what my father must have known all along. Money fades, titles crumble, but the knife of betrayal always finds its way back to the hand that held it.